Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Carefulist, the podcast. I'm Katie Christophic, founder of The Carefulist. Today, we have Lynn Lambrecht joining our conversation. She is an author and a consultant in the planning space. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you for having me, Katie.
I'm so glad that you could be here. And we'll get to all of our conversation about planning and all of that good stuff. But let's start where all of your story began. Um, we'll start with the caregiving side of it, and then we can progress.
It's interesting. I don't even think of the caregiving side. Initially, when I was a little girl, I grew up on a dead-end court and we had older neighbors. And we didn't lock our doors. I mean, it was like that good old Midwestern little area. And I would like scamper off at like the age of 4 and check in on all my older neighbors because they didn't have kids living with them. They were by themselves. So I
Yeah.
think I was almost the court designee of making sure the oldies were okay. And we my mom didn't know where I was half the time. My older sister told me recently, she said, Lenny, I think you're the one that helped me learn a bit about socialization because I wasn't ever sure where to find you. And I would check with this neighbor and this neighbor and this neighbor and this neighbor, and I wouldn't have done that naturally. So I
Yeah.
think it was truly when it started and how it started.
Wow. That's fantastic. And I, what's the word I'm looking for? I'll have to edit this little part out. I identify with that so much because I did the same thing. Not necessarily from the perspective of checking on older neighbors, but just going and riding my bike and stopping and talking to anybody and everybody who was outside. And my mom used to joke that she would start the phone chain like, "Where's Katie? Somewhere in the neighborhood. We're going to find her."
They knew at my house too, oh, she's just down the block somewhere, blah blah blah. And the person at the end, I grew up in a dead end court. The
Uh-huh.
person at the end of the dead end court, my older brother, older sister, and I all have like called her our second mom because she was truly at the last house on the same side of the street as me, but there was a hill going down behind
Mm,
it into a ravine. And I mean, I'd be in there looking for tadpoles and stuff. So, yeah, they all checked in with the last
right.
house to see where any of the Lambrecht children were in throughout our growing up stage. It was bad.
So much fun at the same time.
A blast.
So, that is the very start of your caregiving journey. Um, I know you ended up actually caring for your parents somewhere down the line. Can you share a little bit about that?
I can. I'm happy to. I mean, it's interesting because after my little dumb, in college, I was a resident assistant in undergrad and I was a head res in grad school. And in some ways, that was a caregiving journey,
Yeah.
of working with people and contemporaries. When I was working in aviation, I became a volunteer emergency team responder. So that was caregiving of people that were in a situation. And then with my parents, because I was the youngest child and there was a large age gap, they
Mhm.
were a lot older than me and older than most of my friends' parents. And so I was like the first kid of my girlfriends that went
Yeah.
through the situation of having declining health issues and different things. Mine was a little unusual because in my aviation career, I moved a lot and I
Mhm.
changed countries and companies, not just states. So I was in Asia at the time when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And
Mhm.
so I did not want to be 8,000 miles away from where I had grown up. And thankfully, the airline I was with at the time was based also in Illinois, across the state, but hey, it was a whole lot better than 8,000 miles away. And my
Yeah.
boss was very, very understanding because we didn't really have a repatriation program. And he was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, Mark, you just work for me from there until you get find a place in that puzzle palace of headquarters." And I did. I worked honestly virtually, which was unheard of in
Mhm.
the 90s like that, until I got a job in headquarters, and it allowed me to be 177 miles away each way. It allowed me to visit every weekend and do the beginning of the prep, if you will. I did like all the meals so that for the
Mhm.
freezer and that kind of prep. Teach my mom a lot of the day-to-day basics of what my dad had always been in charge of, and be
Mm.
there in
Yeah.
support of and with my dad.
Mhm.
I don't know. I know you've gone through a similar experience, and that side of the caregiving is interesting because we're not in control of anything,
Right.
and we would love to be. But what I helped me in many ways, and I always call that part of the journey, the greatest gift my dad ever gave me was not knowing me. And my
Mhm.
brother and sister think I'm nuts,
Mhm.
but honestly, I didn't have any more labels. I wasn't the youngest child.
Yeah.
I wasn't, but a name. I
Mhm.
wasn't a job title. I wasn't where I lived. I was just the person that would come every time, and sometimes during the week if
Right.
I had to, that would bring a sparkle to the eye and a smile to his face, which said, you know what, he feels safe with me. And that is
Mhm.
a gift. And if I can be known for kindness, I'm happy.
Yeah. Yes.
So that was the first experience. The second experience was with mom.
Mhm.
And it is ironic that I was on my second international assignment, my second time being in year four, based out of the US, when my mom started failing. And
Mhm.
I thought, you know what? Again, I was closer this time. I was in Montreal, but I thought I am not going to renew my contract, and it's a good time for me to get back so that we could get things situated and put together. Mom's cognitive abilities were stronger, her heart was not.
Mm.
And she had, and honestly, during the time with dad, she had issues simultaneously. So it was interesting to have both parents and stuff. So it's something where it just kind of always went beyond me. It was kind of like being little again and checking in on my older neighbors, but
Yeah.
learning not to personalize, and any kind of anything. Now, dad not knowing me to mom having an anger outburst or a
Mhm.
frustration outburst. I mean, the range of emotions that come it for the people that we're caring about and caring for
Mhm.
and our own are very interesting to, like kind of counterbalance. At least when I was like coming back from the Chicago area into the Quad Cities, I knew that I had a 3-hour drive home. And
Yeah.
so that was my time where, because always tried to put on the brave and supportive face. And
Yep.
so when I was driving there, I was like powering up of this
Mhm.
about me. This is all about them. What can I do to make, like safety and comfort and dignity and, the things that I would want, frankly.
Mhm.
Something that helped me though, before either of them went into the decline, I was that child that would always ask the questions, and I would probe about things that they would prefer not to discuss. And I
Mhm.
remember asking them, and I'm laughing now because it was like at my age. They were my age when I started asking of, can you guys define for me quality of life?
Yeah.
What does it mean to you? And they, were kind of inquisitive, like little faces. And I said,
Yeah.
well, no, really. I mean, what are the things that you would want to see and to hear and to smell and to taste and to touch? If you aren't able to tell me,
Right.
What should I be aware of? And what was fascinating is that my dad was usually the one not to be effervescent and,
Hmm.
comfortable in that way. And he was like, well, I would like to listen to Nat King Cole music and Ella Fitzgerald and, blah, blah, blah. I mean, our Sunday morning music. And
Yeah.
just put me outside, out on the back deck, so I can look at the woods and see the birds and do this and do it. He like jumped in and started like
Right.
blabbing. And honestly, what a blessing that was for when his Alzheimer's came, because I knew that I could, have the Sunday morning music, as I called it,
Hmm.
on the stereo. I put the albums in, have him sit outside, and we would just sit outside and watch the birds
Oh,
and,
that's so
like
wonderful.
do things without. And I knew he was content because his
Yeah.
face didn't have any signs of stress, but he
Right.
had also,
Yeah.
so I could honor that. And the same with mom, because she wanted soft and fuzzy things. She
Hmm.
wanted chocolate and she wanted cookies. She wanted areas. So I always knew ways that I could bring little elements of comfort, and I
Hmm.
asked 20 years before they needed to have it.
Yeah. And that's such an important thing to know about your loved ones in general. But when you don't feel well and you
Mhm.
don't have the ability to communicate with someone what you need or what would help you to feel better, I I struggle to find the words about how that would make me feel.
I know,
So
I know for me, I have listed out these are the teas that I love, and these are the like aromatherapy smells that I love, and this is
Mhm.
this, and yes, because honestly, think of it. You're absolutely right. What do we want to when we want to curl up in a little ball?
Mhm.
What do we want?
Right.
Asking ourselves while we're healthy is like really a gift, and I know that my parents, my siblings thought I was completely nuts, but I just wanted to know because I thought,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm the oldest of the second generation, so I'm going to be the one coming in, and I want to make sure
Right.
that I, give them the comfort and the dignity that they want.
Right. Well, and I think it's such a good distinction because it maintains that level of humanity and personality, and you are not just making that person a patient. It's that element of home and family and being cared for.
Well, and I think that one lesson I learned from each of them is how each of them felt like they had lost all control.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because that incorporated them into the process
Yes.
unknowingly on my end, by the way. I mean, this was just all intuitive for me.
Mm.
But it gave them a modicum of that control. And I could tell if like the music wasn't the one that was desired, and I'd change it. And then it would be like,
Mhm.
because I knew some of the backups. And the same with mom. She had certain musical
Right.
things to like. So, I mean, it gave me a roadmap before
Hmm.
I needed to have it.
Yeah. Oh, that is such good advice and something that everyone should be thinking about, not only for the people that they're currently caring for, but for themselves. And have it somewhere that you've let other people know this is where to find what I want, or you email it to them, or whatever you do, just have this somewhere for safekeeping in case. Because
It
eventually you'll need it.
Not very many of us fall asleep and don't wake up.
Right.
Usually there's a transitional period. So in
Right.
that transitional period, what is it that we need? And it's actually something I've been trying to think of lately is having recordings of,
Mm,
okay, so you guys, if I'm in this situation, these are the things that I really want you to pay attention to, or
yeah.
because I'm the one that has always done it.
Right.
So I don't have children. And
Hmm.
so that would be, I get to be my own kid.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to look at that as well, because there is a very large population of people
There's a lot
who
of us that
are,
fly solo.
yeah, who are aging, yeah, without a direct generation to manage their care.
So we get to be our own kids.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm going to use that.
You may.
I'll, I'll, I'll say where I got it. I'll give credit where it's due. Um,
It's okay.
so while we're chuckling, um, is there anything that you found during your caregiving journey that would bring a smile to your face or make you laugh or bring joy in general?
Quite honestly, gallows humor has served me for years. Um, and I think part of it is it helps me lighten up because I can get pretty intense. Especially I'm the quiet feeler. I
Hmm.
don't normally, you know, yeah. So anyway, for me to find something that would bring a sparkle, I mean, looking at my father, who was a dentist, not and taking out a toothbrush and putting toothpaste on it and having him not understand what that was to brush his teeth. It was like, and so of course my response was, Dad, you made me chew those little red tablets for years to make sure
Uh-huh.
I was brushing, carefully enough. Don't you tell me that you filed that away. And I didn't say it for him. I said it for me to
Right.
lighten that moment. Because, then
Yeah.
I'd get in the car and drive back and, and I'd release
Yes.
my emotions. But when I was present, in
Mm,
those times and in those moments, I thought, okay, what's the way that I can not be judgy, but
mhm.
have some fun,
Right.
and make sure that he understood, or when it was mom's turn, she understood that it was
Hmm.
fun. And like with my mom, oh my God, I have an overflowing glass, and my mom didn't have a glass where we were polar opposites on that stuff.
Yeah.
She'd be like, "Where did you come from?" And I'd say, "You and Dad." And so
Congratulations.
I find it toward really close to the end. I was saying, Mom, are you feeling at peace? What can we do to make sure that you're feeling at peace? I'm living in, you know. And I would just look at her and she'd say, I'm going to purgatory. And I say, oh, honey, I'll meet you there. You know me. I've been a sass since I was born. It, my mom, who did not laugh.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I mean, for me, it was like, okay, when you're choosing to respond, how are you choosing to respond? So giving myself that pause, but
Mhm.
also finding something that could lighten it, and it was usually humor that did that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good piece of advice. Um, so while you were experiencing all of this, was there a piece of advice or something someone did for you that was helpful as a caregiver?
Well, again, because I was the first of all my girlfriends to kind of go through this, because
Yeah.
my parents were like 10 years old, 10 years plus older.
Mhm.
I remember thinking, okay, I need to bear this load by myself. And, I had like the double hit. The person that was in visiting my dad at the house, um, had to leave for a reason. And I got a call simultaneously telling me the ambulance was there taking my mom to the hospital. Now I lived normal driving 3 hours, but I used to make it in like 2.5.
Yeah.
So I called one of my girlfriends and I just said, okay, this is the situation. Would you mind going over to the house and babysitting dad so that I
Hmm.
can drive straight to the hospital? And the answer was, it's about damn time you asked. We've all been waiting.
Oh,
And I realized at that moment, by bearing the load and thinking I had to do it all and I didn't want to trouble others, I
hmm.
was depriving them of the very joy I get from giving.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I needed to add, and then it became like the joke between my girlfriends because we have a text chain to this day. But it's like one of those things where it's like it's okay.
Hmm.
And of course, she didn't just come empty-handed. She came with meals. She came with like dad's favorite snacks. It was because we had all known each other. And I'm
Right.
so appreciative. I don't know that I would have made it through those times without them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. I'm so glad that they were there and ready. And it's a delicate balance that the people who are just on the periphery of the orbit, the caregiving orbit, they don't know when to step in. Like they're ready, but they don't want to overwhelm you, so
And
they
they
don't
have their
say
own
anything.
families and their own
Yep.
kids and their own parents and their own needs
Mhm.
and all of that. But it was the door opened at that moment. And from that
Yeah.
moment forward, there were times when I would literally go meet them somewhere and then we could have like a conversation.
Yeah.
I
Oh, that's
had
so
been
nice.
prepared kind of to do that
Hmm. Yeah.
because I was the preview of coming attractions
Right.
for them.
Yes. Right. Yeah, I remember feeling a similar way because my parents were older when we were born, and then my mom was only in her 60s
She was a
when
baby.
dementia started. So we were ahead of the curve in terms of all of our friends. But I am very grateful to people that I worked with who were a bit older than me, and some of them a little bit more so than a few years. But one of my colleagues, her dad had had some heart issues when
Mhm.
she was young and her kids were young. And so we understood one another. I had another colleague who has dealt with loss of parents and parents declining. And so I almost found myself being in the company of people who were older than I was and not enjoying it more, but enjoying it in a different way because we could relate better in our current circumstances.
Well, and honestly, that was my boss in Hong Kong
Mm,
because he was an older guy.
yeah.
And and everybody behind his back that everybody called him the cranky because he was, and when I went in to just say I love my job, but I also only have one set of parents and this is what's going on, and I think it's time for me to get back to the States, he
Hmm.
started crying, which
Oh,
I had
yeah.
never. And I said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, everybody calls you the cranky." And he said, "You're the only one that ever tells me." But it was very interesting because he did not have to make the arrangements for me to
Mhm.
literally work virtually Chicago to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
He
Wow.
didn't, and he did. And that kindness
Those are the
keep
people that you remember forever. Yeah. And
yeah,
I'm so glad that there seem to be more and more
yes,
people who
yes.
are understanding and extending those types of courtesies. Um,
And when they don't, it might be because they haven't been exposed. And
right.
our exposure to them I
Hmm.
think is something that if they're open to hear a conversation about,
Hmm.
these would be the things that would be really helpful,
Yeah,
um, or a resource perspective. That then helps we get to pave the path for the next person.
that's right. Yes.
I know I make lemonade out of any lemon I'm given, but what can I say?
It's a way to get through life. A good one,
And
a
if you're
healthy
just a
one.
choice, as I used to tell my mom when she was ready to like throw me out the door.
Lemonade's delicious.
It is yummy. Yeah.
So, you've mentioned your career, and I would like to talk a little bit more about that because there are things in your career experience that have
Mhm.
informed the way that you dealt with being a caregiver and then what you're doing now.
That would probably be the understatement because it was the way that it definitely could show me directly. For those, yeah, listening, I was in aviation. I was in the management side. I was asked to become an emergency team responder on a voluntary basis when I started my career. And of course, because of my crisis intervention training that I had had as a resident assistant in the head res and strangely enough, I mean, I'm a live wire, but boy, am I calm. And when a situation is big and I just
Yeah.
kind of almost zen out, and all I can think of is that person that needs information, resources, support, or just two ears to listen.
Hmm.
That's who I am. I have a servant's heart. So I, of course, asked for detail as to what that might entail, and was told I'd be called to crash sites and have a variety of possible, ways to help. And I
Hmm.
said, certainly sign me up. But when you say that at age 22, you really aren't thinking about that, especially as you're entering into a job and a career and things of
Hmm.
that nature. And I was called twice in my 20s, to help. And the first time, everyone had died. And by the time I had red-eyed in to get to the crash site, it was all the families were assigned, and I always thought that I'd be assigned to a family. So I
Hmm.
worked other roles, on the ground and in the temporary morgue that we had established, and then in the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, heading up the crisis phone lines for the family members. And I don't
Hmm.
know about you, but I know I wouldn't be sleeping if that had happened in my family. And the thing that I learned from that was, to me, that is a time that we need to grieve. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, that isn't what I saw, because there was too much concern of how was I going to wake up the next morning and carry on some semblance of how life had been. And
Right.
the lack of practical planning, it planted the seed for what I do now,
Hmm.
is the first thing I learned. But the second thing I learned was how I could take it away with me. And what's fascinating is that, yes, that's when I started having all these conversations with my poor parents.
Hmm.
And I visited every 3 months because I was checking in on them, and my girlfriends were coming home to start their families and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. I got to dual serve that purpose. But
Hmm.
crash number two opened my eyes in a different way too, because everyone lived, and they needed me to provide support to the person that had lived and had been burned badly,
Mm.
who wasn't able to communicate and help his parents.
Yeah.
So, I learned a lot from that one too, because I think when we don't like to talk about any of this anyway, but we
Hmm.
certainly don't want to talk about, like not being fully functioning.
Right.
And that is interesting, because that whole D word, can be death or disability, and sometimes it's both. And
Yeah.
honestly, and it's really, societally, we just don't make room for this in our conversations. And,
Mm.
I did all of my legal documents in my 20s because I decided I wanted helpers. And I
Hmm.
remember talking to the attorney about, well, where's the rest of it? They were like offended. And I said, well, no, how does, somebody know where I live? How does somebody know this? How does somebody know? And they're like, oh, yeah, don't do that. So what I
Hmm.
found in my job, I was having promotions and moving a lot. And when I was a leader of people and having people in multiple states and realizing that their situations were, different. I
Mm.
had single moms. I had, it was just different. And I thought, oh, how are we helping each other? Because to me, it's always, who are your helpers? So I had
Right.
everybody in groups of three. So we had a backup to the backup in case somebody needed
Hmm.
something or needed to go or needed to help one another. I wrote step-in plans to get in each office, because how are you going to get in if you don't know how to get in? So
Right.
the lessons that I learned served me from a
Hmm.
different level of practicality. And with myself, I just created what I called my trail of breadcrumbs,
Yeah.
because who could ever know what my crazy life was like unless I
Hmm.
let them know? So,
Right.
outline some of the details, and you communicate that with your trusted people, your
Hmm.
helpers, whether you have formally done that or not. There are people that you would count on. I
Hmm.
just brought all of those lessons, I think, with me, and it taught me that the advanced part of the discussion is to get clear for yourself on what those decisions are that you would want to make or
Yeah.
have for you, and then communicate. Because I
Hmm.
think what I learned on that first crash is that we play to our strengths, and we divide and conquer a lot as, units, little nuclear units or friend units, but we don't always then bridge that gap with the communication of, well, what's needed if I'm not able. And it
Right.
could be taking a sabbatical. It doesn't have to mean something awful. So
Yeah.
we just don't have enough of that communication. And I think that the career part, other than being able to work on 6 continents and having all kinds of like other experiences in my worldview, being an expat twice. I mean, there are administrative variables to our lives that we're not taught.
Hmm.
And that's
Yes.
the that we need, that is important for us, A, to recognize, but B, fill in the gaps for somebody that might have to be your helper.
Yeah, exactly right. You had shared with me a specific story and, let
I
me
know you're
know if
going to
it.
have to remind me which one because I was laughing, going, I told you many stories, so give me a hint. Start me out.
There was a gentleman who became ill and you needed to reconfigure things and use that three-pronged step-in
Yes.
plan that you had created.
Yeah. Well, you know what? In our work units, it's interesting. We have people that, we are all assigned different tasks and whatever. And so if you're overseeing the work unit or you're a participant in the work unit, who is it that can have access or know a
Hmm.
little bit about what you do? And that's why I had always had people in groups of three, the backup to the backup. And in my
Hmm.
case, in that time, there was one particular person that was diagnosed with cancer and was going to be out and didn't know if wasn't sure that if they could come back. And I thought,
Hmm.
interesting. There are 6 people in our company trained to do this job. I'm one of the 6. So it's now time for me to step in. And what that did is created some illumination around the others that hadn't really realized why I was so passionate about it, but
Hmm.
the just the revenue gain, but the client interaction. I mean,
Right.
we had so many things. Plus, it's like the personal support
Yeah.
of knowing that no, you're not going to be replaced.
Hmm.
We're filling in, and then that
Right.
becomes the person's choice. So for me, it was just a human way to handle it. But I've been thinking about other situations too. And honestly, Y2K taught us a lot
Yeah.
because that's when business resumption from a business side. But what every example I was trying to think of that it comes, that came to the forefront for companies was more about the operational side, not the human side behind the operation. And
Yeah.
I always saw this as a human side behind operation.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted you to talk about it because it is such a different way of thinking from the traditional approach to business.
I know I was not what they would call like from the box, in the box on the people. And I was the first woman to do most of my jobs in a pretty male dominated industry. And
Hmm.
that there's to me, it was the right, you do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Yep.
And for me, employees, first customer you'll ever have
Right.
because they are the mouthpiece. And, I don't know, maybe it's just that care culture that I have always subscribed to, whether it was in my neighborhood checking on the oldies,
Hmm.
whether it in the dorms, making sure that all of us had information and resources as we needed, whether it was in my job. So
Right.
I am a relationally built person. I am not a transactional person. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I turn it upside down every time of what's the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because I think traditionally, I know for my own career, traditionally, it's transactional. But the more things change culturally for
Mhm,
us, it
mhm,
has to also change and be reflected in the business world for it
mhm.
to work.
We're in a tough time because there's a whole lot of pushback in general. And I think some of the people counting on working for a company for a long period of time is kind of is past tense.
Yeah.
The loyalty factor is a two-way street. It's kind of like reading the first contract I was ever supposed to give a corporation, and having and reading it and saying, I wouldn't sign this. And the attorney saying, why not? I said, it's great. I mean, we're protecting ourselves, but where's their protection? This needs to be mutual. And I mean,
Yeah.
I was 23, 22. I mean, I've just been kind of that person the whole time
Right.
because at the end of the day, don't you want mutual satisfaction? It doesn't mean to like I'm not in power. It just is a different level of actually support. For me, it's a
Right.
simple support. So I don't know. I don't know if the loyalty thing will come back because I know that everything. I was in that generation where pensions went away, 401ks came, all this other stuff that used to be the reason why. But and as long as a public company is answering to the shareholder, they're not always thinking as much of the employee. But without the employee, you're not going to satisfy the shareholder. So it's that chicken and egg theory that I think it
Right.
would be just bounce it around, crack that egg, scramble it up, and say, guess what? It's your people first.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I'm irreverent that way.
Well, I was going to say people omelet, and then I stopped myself because I thought, well, that's going to be taken all kinds of wrong ways. That's not what
I'm
I
just
meant.
scrambling the egg.
We'll just leave it at scramble the egg. So we've gone through all of these different stages of your career and all of these learnings that you've taken and internalized and then applied personally. So now you have taken that and you have shared what you've learned. And I would love to hear about what you're doing now and how you're applying that to helping other people figure their own situations out.
Thank you for that question. I mean, I know when I came back from Montreal to help with that transitioning piece for mom, I thought, okay, hold on here. You don't have a job, then you're kind of a worker. Um, what what is it that what skills do you possess? What talents do you have? And how do you wish to like serve? I mean, what's
Hmm.
meaningful for you? And that's when I thought, okay, let's just look at all these pieces, patchwork quilt pieces of my life. And, I came on that common theme of just saying, okay, people aren't doing what, is kind of practical and really necessary and reduces stress and, helps people make decisions and have a roadmap when and blah blah blah. And I thought,
Right.
but we have this really interesting gap because we have amazing professionals, whether
Hmm.
they're in the legal profession or they're in the financial profession or they're in the insurance protection, profession, tax mitigation, all of those things, but they play their lane. And I thought, I'm just going to create a holistic version of actually looking at the person, whether,
Yes.
we're at home or at work, and what are those things from a contingency side that would be helpful. So for me, it's going back to what I did, creating like my trail of breadcrumbs, making sure
Right.
that I had documents. I was giving authorization to people when that would be needed. I was giving them access to the information as it would be needed. And I was taking action on an ongoing basis to stay
Hmm.
up to date, to, make sure it's done. So I don't know, the living planner was born at that point. And I thought, okay, let's write some of this stuff down as a thought that, as thoughts. And I thought, okay, pre-planning, what do we need to do at a loss? Because I have been in
Hmm.
many of those situations with the crash. And then what's the follow-up that's needed? So
Right.
I have a book, The Living Planner, What to Prepare Now While You Were Living, that addresses the pre-planning. I wrote it from the perspective of talking to my mom and dad before I left for China. I said, you guys, I can get home from anywhere in the world in 24 hours.
Hmm.
But if you haven't authorized permissions for me to help, my hands will be tied.
Right.
And, I had been on that road for like 13, 14 years at this point, and they said, get home. And I asked my dad, why haven't you guys done this? Updated things. Well, just tell me what's prevented you. And he said he
Hmm.
didn't want to be embarrassed by asking the wrong things or not knowing what to ask. And
Oh.
that people were speaking in their own language. And, he was a dentist that had like the patients that priests and nuns didn't pay, and people that needed help didn't. I mean, he just didn't focus on the business, he focused on the serving. Wonder where I get that. So it was interesting because I'd never thought of dad feeling insecure that he wasn't caring for his family
Right.
or embarrassed to ask. And so I was their layperson interpreter. And so what I've tried to do in the book is write with that spirit in mind of,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, well, this is a will, but what does that mean? Because what's the application for us as lay people, not as the professionals that are like, blah, 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 blah. I mean, our eyes are rolling in the back of our head, and then we don't know the follow-up questions to ask because we're not comfortable. So when
Right.
I work with clients now, we go through all that stuff so that they have a better baseline of A, what to expect, but B, what to ask and how to ask it. And if they're uncomfortable, to kind of work through that boogie and stuff too. So, and businesses, frankly, who's going to step in for us too, even if we want to take a long vacation? And if you have employees,
Mhm.
your key employees, I mean, okay, who's the backfill? Who's this? I mean, if it's you, who signs the checks? Who's got this?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm like little Miss Curiosity. It drives everybody nuts, and literally go through your day-to-day life, whether it's at
Yeah.
home or work.
Oh, I love that. And you hit on something that's so key, and that is embarrassment. And that prevents so many important conversations. And
Mhm.
I think it goes in a couple of different directions. One is when you're talking with quote unquote professionals, whether it be lawyers or doctors, there is this pedestal on which they've been placed that you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of someone who is so smart, who's so accomplished,
I'm gonna
educated,
trust them. They had
the
know
whole deal.
everything.
Right. And then there's the role reversal in care, especially if you're talking parents to children, right? Parents don't want to come across like they don't know something because they're the parent. They're supposed to know.
Mhm.
Um, and that just it holds back so many conversations. And I was talking with my daughter the other day about being afraid to talk to people because they're important or because of who they are. And I said, I don't know that they teach this so much anymore, but that whole adage of when you're about to speak in front of a room of people and you imagine them however you
Right.
want to imagine them wearing flip-flops or fill in the blank. Um, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, that is interesting." And I said, "I still do it because I'm talking to people who are very well accomplished and who've had amazing careers and done all kinds of things with their lives. And once in a while, I'm like, oh gosh, I hope I don't come across XYZ, fill in the blank. Um, but at the end of the day, we are all human beings and
We
we
are.
all need one another to get through.
And if we're curious and we exhibit the fact that we'd like to learn, and it's
Mhm.
not that I'm just being cheeky that I'm asking this, but it's truly how I may better care for mom,
Right.
dad, siblings, myself.
Mhm.
I remember a personal experience with a physician for me when
Mhm.
had a high eye pressure and they thought I had potentially acute glaucoma. And these are my cheaters. I mean, I still have 20/25 vision, and no, I didn't go blind in a month like they had all told me. But it
Mhm.
was interesting because I, the doctor was looking down at the paper and looking at all the tests, and I said, "Excuse me, I'm here,
Mm.
and I'm a participant in this care, not an observer, and I would
Mhm.
like to know what this is and what this is and what this is and what this is." Okay, so he left the room, and he's quite known around the world apparently, and all of the people in the room
Apparently,
were.
I love that.
So he comes back in and he gives me a pile of paper this high and says, "Participant, I would like you to recap this for me when I see you again in 3 weeks. And by the way, you don't have glaucoma and you're not going blind." And I thought, and I looked at him, I said, "Thank you. I'll be back." So, of course, I did my executive summary with like seven or 8 points. Came in the 3 weeks and he said, "Oh, God, just come work here." And I said, "Oh, no, but participate with me." And he said, "I've learned that."
Yeah.
But it's important. when
Yes.
we, especially in times when we are curious and it is about you, you get to ask questions and you get to
Yeah.
understand and find the ways that will help you understand.
Right. And just because someone is an expert and they have done something for a long time, it doesn't mean that you can't challenge them. They may not be used to it. They may have to, figure out what to do with their ego,
Mhm.
but you should still challenge them and make them explain things to you until you understand that is their job.
It is their job. And I don't pay attorneys by the word. I pay them to, protect as best as possible and explain to me what that means to me.
Yes.
I don't pay financial people, I mean, or insurance people. I want them to give me what the totality is so that I can think it through. Now, some people aren't in that space because they would much rather just like let it go. But it's what I have found is they used to have a saying when I was little is the devil is in the details.
Yes.
And, it's kind of like when we check on when we visit a website and we hit yes, 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 yes under terms of condition. What have you actually said yes to?
Hmm.
And it's really fascinating because, especially now, I'm working with some young kids and they're all because
Right.
it's the beginning time of understanding that with all the fun that comes with independence, there are some responsibilities. And what does that mean?
Yeah. And that is a great transition to the last thing that I wanted to talk with you about. So thank you.
Okay.
When we met before, we were talking about the different groups of people that you work with.
Mhm.
And one that jumped out to me, that made a lot of sense, is this 18 to 25-year-old group of people. Because when someone in the US turns 18, they are an adult, whether they still live in your house, whether they're
Or not.
still on your insurance and all of that.
Mhm.
So the young folks most likely are not listening to the podcast right now, but their parents, aunts, uncles,
Yeah.
grandparents are. So how do they broach this subject with the 18 to 25-year-old in their life? What do they need to start thinking about and preparing?
For the parents, especially, I will tell you, I know I've done some coming of age talks in
Hmm.
conjunction with some firms. And it's interesting because when people are fortunate enough to have caring parents, you want the best for your children. And part of that is, you've been doing stuff like for them. And so it's teaching them some of the things that you've been doing. Like if they needed to make a dental appointment, do they know how to call and what to ask for? If they need to make a doctor's appointment, do they know where the insurance card is and how to do that?
Hmm.
When they turn 18, see, this is when it gets a little odd because you can be paying for their health insurance and their dental insurance and their vision insurance, but they are the ones that have to give permission for you to be notified through the HIPAA documentation that either
Hmm.
the caregivers, the patient care person in the office or
Hmm.
at the hospital if they're in the hospital, and they
Hmm.
have to designate who can be notified because that becomes one of their first responsibilities.
Yes.
And it's really interesting because I think we want to spare our kids some of that. But part of the reason I'm passionate about that is when I went to college, I was 17
Hmm.
and I went to school out of state. And I went to my health center and said, I'm allergic to penicillin. I'm allergic to codeine, blah, blah, blah. And then, turned 18, went home for Christmas, came back to school, and I had a very bad case of strep throat and went
Hmm.
into the health center. And the health center either didn't read my file or misread my file. And they shot me up with penicillin. And I woke up with 105 fever in an ice bath.
Oh
And
my.
the first thing, because I passed out, and the
Yeah.
first thing I asked was, did you call mom and dad? And they
Hmm.
said, no, we don't have permission to do that. That was the 70s.
Yeah.
So just know that my dad was a dentist. I mean, and I grew up in a small town. So everybody
Hmm.
talked to everybody. And
Right.
yet, true official is, they don't. have to tell people. So I think it's important for us to just kind of say, hey, you know what? There are some things that are going to happen. We have responsibilities that are going to, that will be here with your life. Some of it
Mhm.
is stuff that you may not have participated in before. So let's talk about it. I mean, have you done any had any financial planning with your kids? I mean, do they know what the cost of things are?
Mhm.
What here I delayed gratification a little bit, or how do I save, or
Yep.
what are the apps that everybody's using, or do they know what a true bank account is? I mean, my dad took me to open my first savings account when I was little.
Mhm.
So that part wasn't foreign, but like the process of it,
Yep.
what's a credit score? What's this? And so I'm working with an intern right now because we decided he's a college intern. And so we did a
Mhm.
survey for 18 to 25-year-olds. And I wanted him to express the things he wanted to know, to have a good foundation. And I
Mhm.
loved it because one of the things he added was, I don't know how to cook. Act up. So we're going to actually do like a little program before the end of the semester and calling it Recipe for Success, because I can introduce budgeting with that,
Yeah,
you know.
right.
Anyway, so just know that the broader base of understanding that your kids know about, sometimes it's going to be state by state, though, of different
Mhm.
particulars that may apply. But if they were like had a bicycle accident or an e-bike accident and were in the hospital, you'd want to know. And
Right.
if they had their own Spotify account, who's going to pay it? And,
Mhm.
just like I put it in their terms to
Right.
educate them. And I'm always happy to do like parental talks to just kind of give like those five basic tips and then go deeper.
Yeah. Oh, great. So if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
I try to be as accessible as I can. I'm on all the goofy social media things, but send me an email at Lynn, Lynn at thelivingplanner.com. You can call my office number. It's both, like phone or text, and that's area code 951-400 5966. Or find me, on LinkedIn, or, where my business, my Living Planner Facebook page, or my Living Planner Instagram page, or, and all of that kind of stuff. But I'd rather just have the touch base.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. We have been talking with Lynn Lambrecht of the Living Planner today, and you can find the Living Planner on our website when it launches anew toward the end of April, early May time. So by the time this airs, it will probably be on there. Thank you, Lynn, for joining us today and sharing all of your experience.
No, you're so welcome. And I did forget, thelivingplanner.com is my website. But thank you for
Perfect.
having me. And Katie, thank you for doing what you're doing. It is sorely needed. I'm taking the whole proactive approach, and you're like in the thick with people. And just thank you for doing what you're doing. I wish I would have had you or known about someone like you during my time.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Careful List the podcast. Until next time, take care.